and that notion was causality. In other words, given like a particular variable y, we are interested in finding various possible causes for that variable y. To be more specific, in yesterday's class, out of all the possible causes, we focused on one particular thing which we called as the treatment, and apart from that there were other potential influencers. And then the specific question which we were interested in answering was that whether that treatment has an impact on the outcome variable y or not. That is to say, if we have different groups of people, or let us say if we have two groups of people, one group of people is given the treatment and another group of people is not given the treatment, then can we say that the first group reacts in a particular way, that is the outcome variable y, it takes some values for the first group of people and a different value for the second group of people, right? This is the question of causality which we are interested in answering, and due to that we decided to take recourse to the method of randomized control trials. So according to that, like if it is actually found that that is the treated population behaves differently from the untreated population, then we can say that the treatment actually has an impact on the outcome variable. That is to say, the treatment cause is a cause for the for the outcome variable. Uh, so this is one statement which I made. Can anyone point out a flaw in what I just said? Just to repeat, there are two groups of people. I have two groups of people on both of whom I am observing a variable called y. So let that be there whether they recover from a particular disease or they do not recover. Now the first group of people, I administer a particular treatment which I call as say D. The second group, I do not administer that treatment. So and it is and it turns out that the first group which received the treatment, they recover from the disease, or many of them recover from the disease. In the second group of people, many of them do not recover from that disease. So then based on that, this observation, I draw a conclusion that the treatment D causes the recovery from the disease. Now, is this right or is this wrong? My conclusion, is this right or is this wrong?
So there is no randomized selection. So
Sorry?
randomized selection should be there for the groups, right?
So what does that mean?
Like both the groups should be chosen randomly from a population.
Right. So what has more specifically, what happens if both the groups are chosen randomly?
Then it would be the it won't be biased actually. Like
So
in the
what?
case of virus we're
Okay.
talking about, so it might be possible that as you gave example yesterday, that other group might be software developers, so they won't be needing to go out, and then they definitely won't be getting coronavirus, like they won't have that much high probability, while the other group who need to go out every day, they might have a higher probability. So
Yeah. Thank you. That's the correct answer. So just to paraphrase your answer in another words, but basically what we need, that is the statement which I made will be valid only under the specific condition that all the other factors, all the other potential factors remain unchanged between the two groups. I mean, at least in a statistical sense. So like just like Gaurav gave this example of the recovery from, or that is whether people get infected with COVID or not. So that depends on, that depends not only on the treatment that we are talking about, such as vaccination, but it also depends on the lifestyle of the other people, that is whether they are going out or whether they are working from home. So the second one, the second factor, that is this their lifestyle, it is something which is independent of the treatment. That is whether they receive the treatment or not does not change their lifestyle. Their lifestyle can impact whether they receive the treatment or not due to some in a different way, but it cannot happen that because they receive a particular treatment their lifestyle changes. That is not going to happen. So the conclusion which I mentioned is a value that say for example, if we are talking about COVID vaccination, then the conclusion which I mentioned, that vaccination secures people against the COVID infection. This conclusion I can draw only if I can only if my the two populations which I have considered have all other factors in common. There is no discrimination between the two groups of people, that is the control group and the treatment group, in terms of the other possible impacts, right? So that is a very important statement. Now like yesterday we discussed a lot various things about how to identify potential causes and potential confounders, etc., etc. So today we will so basically whatever we discussed yesterday were based on the notion of feature selection. That is, we tried to cast the problem as the feature selection problem of machine learning. So yesterday, like towards the end, I showed you some slides by Nobel laureate Esther Duflo. Those slides are in our Teams folder. I again encourage you to go through those slides. So there one point has been drawn out. What she has done is she has tried to draw this equivalence between these two, or at least an analogy between the two notions, the notion of feature selection in case of machine learning and that of causal relationship in, or causal factor mining in case of economics. So Esther Duflo as well as several other researchers in this field have pointed out that feature selection methods such as lasso regression or decision trees can be used, can potentially be used for this causal relationship mining with certain riders. So one rider that also we discussed yesterday. So under what circumstance does does lasso regression not work well for causal inference, and then and what modification can we do? Yes. What was discussed yesterday?
So in case of confounders, the lasso regression doesn't work properly. So
Right.
for that we use without lasso.
Right. Exactly. So if there are if there are confounders, then lasso regression does not work properly. And by confounder, what we mean is that if there are some variables which which impact both the treatment as well as the effect, then we say that they are confounders. They are basically confounder means what? Confound, the process of confound means to confuse. To confound someone means to confuse someone. So these are basically things that are, these are factors that are basically confusing us meaning who? Those who are trying to do the causal inference. Okay, so we saw found we saw a different way of doing the lasso regression. That's a two-step lasso in which we basically, instead of solving one regression problem, we solve two regression problems. The first regression problem basically tries to find out which are all the factors, including the treatment, that impact the outcome variable. And the second one was where we are trying to find out all the causal factors that impact the treatment variable itself. Okay, so based on this, we discussed the notion of the double ML, and currently among the economists who work in this area of causal inference, for them this double infer or double lasso, this seems to be a very popular method. Okay, now let us come to the specific case of time series, the time series data set, which I mean the time series data which we had discussed earlier. So suppose we have suppose the observations which we have are in the form of time series. That means what? That means like there are time points like this. So let us say that there are two variables, one is x and the other is y, and I have measurements of both x and y at different time points t1 t2 let's say tn plus 1 etc etc. Okay, tn minus 1 also, and I have accordingly I have x1 x2 all the way up to xn minus 1 xn etc. Similarly for y1. Okay. Now my question is as follows. I want to understand. I mean, this question I think I had posed earlier also, but we had not answered at that time. So now we are coming back to answer this question because now we are in a position to do so. The question is, does x cause y, or does y cause x, or are both causing each other? That is there some kind of a feedback system between them, or are x and y like, or does there exist no kind of causal relationship between x and y? Now x so like we have seen several examples of both of these. Say for example, we had talked about things uh, uh, like as an example of this thing, that is both things causing each other. So we had discussed earlier that this can be a self-reinforcing process as well as a self-destructive process, and we had given some examples of that also. Okay. Now let us consider today like a couple of economic questions which from which this kind of an analysis becomes important. So the first question. So we all know that the climate change is a very important or is a very crucial issue which the entire human civilization is facing today. There is the climate, that is as the world is warming, the temperature is warming, and now not only is the world becoming a hotter place, which means that in another 60-70 years, several places in the earth will become so hot that they are going to be uninhabitable, right? That is the temperature, average temperature will be so high that it will be difficult for human beings and other animals and plants to grow in those. It will become more like a semi-arid or a desert kind of regions. Not only that, we also know that as the climate increases, there are going to be various side effects of that. Say for example, there will be the ice melting, the melting of polar ice, which in turn will mean that there will be more water in the seas, and that also will mean that there is going to be uh, flooding of the various coastal areas. Apart from that, there are going to be extreme weather events, like there are going to be more heavy rainfall, there are going to be more cyclones and so on, right? So that is why the international community on the whole understands that it is very important to control climate change. And it is so one of the, and according to climate scientists, one of the most important causes of this global warming come climate change is the emission of carbon. That is, we know that more there is, that is in industrialized countries, or the process of industrialization itself is related to the release of various harmful gases into the atmosphere. These are known as the greenhouse gases, and what these gases do is that they do not allow the earth to radiate heat and be cool. That is that we all know that the earth gets heated up during the daytime, and in the night time it radiates the heat so that and hence it becomes cool. But in the if there is a high concentration of these greenhouse gases, then the radiation of the heat cannot happen well. So as a result, a lot of heat remains trapped in the earth's atmosphere. As a result, the earth keeps on becoming a hotter place. That is, so that is why it is understood that these greenhouse gases are which is sometimes known as the greenhouse effect. That is one of the important question, or the important causes, or probably the most important cause of global warming and climate change. So of course the question that suggests that we stop emitting greenhouse gases. In other words, we stop like emission of carbon as much as possible. But then again the question arises that, so if we stop carbon emission, then what happens? Then that means most of our industries are able to work by because they emit carbon. That and emission of carbon means shutting down of the industries, and that means that particular country's economy is going to suffer. There are going to be more people unemployed. There will be social agitations, etc., etc. So even if so it's like saying that if you don't release carbon, or if you don't pollute the environment, then there will be economic losses, and if you do emit carbon, then then there is going to be like global warming, and which is ultimately, or in a slightly longer time scale, is going to harm the human civilization. So what to do? So this study here, basically what we are trying to understand here is the economic growth, which is measured in terms of GDP of countries, is economic growth a cause of CO2 emissions, or is CO2 emission a cause of GDP growth? That means what? Like, so here X is like, let us say X is GDP growth and Y is CO2 emission. The first question is, does GDP growth cause carbon emission? That is to say, if a country becomes more and more prosperous, then does it mean that it will like build more industries and it will release more gases? The people there will become more like will adopt a more spendthrift kind of lifestyle, and as a result of that, there will be CO2 emission. That's not an invalid question. That can happen very much. Like as we know that say for example, if we become rich, then we will try to have a more luxurious lifestyle. We will try to travel around more. We will eat like more sophisticated food and all this, and we will try to buy. As we become more rich, we tend to consume more. We tend to more to buy more costly stuff, and then too, as a result of that, there might be like a greater production of CO2. On the contrary, like for a more concrete example, we can say something that is, if we become more richer, then we will buy more cars, and that is, we will buy our personal cars. And if we buy personal car, if everyone buys their personal car, they will be emitting more gases as opposed to this public transport. So we can say that, so it is not weird, or it's not far-fetched to say that an increase of GDP actually causes an increase of CO2. But whether it is actually the case or not is a different thing. But it's not counterintuitive to say that increase of GDP causes increase of CO2 emission. On the other hand, we can say that no, it is CO2 emission which causes GDP growth. That is, the more higher the CO2 emission, that means more the factories are there, and more factories are there means more people can get employed. More people getting employed means more people getting rich, and hence more the CO2 emission, more is the GDP. Okay, so that is also a plausible story. Now, what this research is trying to do is, they are trying to understand which of these two is correct. So let us see what these guys have to say. This paper empirically examines the relationship between carbon emissions and economic growth by applying the co-integration analysis and Granger causality test to the time series of carbon emissions and gross domestic product of the world's top 20 emitters from 1990 to 2015. So let us say that for the different countries in the world, we can measure how much CO2 they have emitted. So accordingly, these countries are measured as like which countries are emitting the most, and so on. Now co-integration analysis show now what these co-integration analysis Granger causality are, we are coming to that later. Co-integration analysis shows that there is a long-term equilibrium relationship between carbon emissions and economic growth in most countries. Granger causality test verifies a one-way causal link between carbon emissions and economic growth in most major emitters. Okay, in develop, so that is to say, it's not this is not the case. What they are saying is that this is not the case. It's not that there is some kind of a self-reinforcing or self-destructing effect here. It's not that as x increases, y increases, and as y increases, x also increases, and the two are trapped in a vicious circle. They're saying no, this is not the case. Instead, what they are saying is Granger causality test verifies a one-way link between in the most of the major emitters. In developed countries, economic growth is the Granger cause of carbon emissions, while the opposite is true in the developing countries. So it's like saying that if we consider the example of a developed country like USA and a developing country like India, it says that the relationship between emission and economic growth are quite the opposite. In US, that is, the more they grow, the more they emit. That is like as I like I the reason for that I already said, that is, since the people there are already on an average more prosperous, the further economic growth means the people's consumption patterns also grow up. That is to say, like one example I gave, buying of personal cars, and as a result of that there is more of CO2 emissions. But in case of developing countries like in the global south in general, including India, the opposite seems to be true. That is to say, it seems that y is the cause and x is the effect. That means the more is the CO2 emission, the more seems to be their GDP development. Okay, so so like as I said, this is not counterintuitive. The reasons for that also I said, the more the CO2 emission, higher CO2 emission indicates the higher number of higher growth of factories. Higher growth of factories indicates more employment. More employment means more prosperity. More prosperity means more higher GDP. Okay, so there is a chain of events like this, due to which is finally showing up as a relationship between y and x. Okay, so that means what? So this basically means that as far as this matter is concerned, the question of climate change and emissions is concerned, the developed countries and the developing countries cannot act in the same ways. Carbon emission, as the authors point out, the result reflect different characteristics regarding carbon emission reduction in developed and developing countries as they are at different development stages. Carbon emission reduction exerts much greater adverse effect on the economic growth of developing countries than it does in the developed countries. That is like for that is to say, consider a developing country where we have found this kind of a causal relationship from the CO2 emission to the GDP growth. Now suppose I decide that suppose that the world as a whole decides that CO2 emission is bad, so it must be stopped. So if CO2 emission is stopped, that is to say, like the industrialization, that means the industrialization process is stopped, like in one stroke everywhere. That means what? Because y causes x, y is the so that is going to have a direct effect on x in the developing countries. That is to say, there will be the GDP growth rate will come down in the developing countries, which means that more people will be unemployed and so on, which is not a good thing to happen. The same cannot be true of the same cannot be said of the developed countries, where the relationship is from x to y. That means even now, if y is affected by some magic method, then that does not necessarily mean that it is going to affect x also, right? So nowadays, of course, there is this focus on renewable energies that is instead of that is people are saying, or scientists are saying, that you do not have to shut down your industries to prevent the emissions. Instead of using carbon, that is instead of emitting carbon, you can that is, if you of course if you use fuel like say coal or petroleum in your industries, then of course you will be emitting CO2. But instead of using these things, why don't you use say solar power? Why don't you use wind energy? These are what is known as renewable energy, and if you use this, then there is going to be less emissions anyway. So what this study seems to suggest is that it's the developed countries should take the lead in in replacing the emission, because they can afford to do so. Even if they reduce their emission, that is, people are not asking them to close down their industries. We are asking them to transition from polluting industries to non-polluting industries, which of course a transition process will be there, which means that there will be a period where there will be a lack of industrial growth. But because that is only the effect and not the cause, so for the developed countries, even if there is a period of recession, or at least in terms of the industry, that is not going to impact the GDP of those countries much. And so it's they who should adopt the renewable energies first, and then pass over the technology, or help or mentor the developing countries to adopt them, so that they can actually change this relationship. Okay, so that is what is suggested in this study. Now a similar study has also been done on the impact of FDI, or that is foreign direct investment, on the GDP growth, per capita GDP of India. So there is this debate, right, that whether India should go for higher FDI or for lower FDI. And there are people of different kinds of opinion. Some people say that yes, we must allow FDI for for higher GDP growth, or for higher growth of our economy. Others say that no such relationship is there. It's because the economy is growing anyway that it seems that that FDI is helping it. But even if FDI was not there, then also the India's GDP would have grown or fallen, whatever it is. But it is so basically the question here boils down to that of causality. Is FDI, or increase of FDI, the cause of increase of India's GDP, or is a GDP, the rise of GDP in India, is that the cause of higher FDI? That is when people foreign, both are possible. That is, if foreign companies invest in India, that may create more job opportunities, hence more people can be employed, hence there can be more prosperity, hence GDP can be higher. On the contrary, if GDP is high, that means if the more prosperous the country becomes, the more attracted the foreign investors are, because the foreign investors also may not like to invest in a country where there are absolutely no facilities. So rather they may be attracted towards a country which already has large airports, it already has large hospitals, restaurants, bars, pubs, etc. So they may want to invest more in such countries. Right, so and hence high GDP may also mean high FDI. So again, whether this is a question of causality, that is whether FDI causes GDP growth or GDP causes FDI. That's a different question. So both of these questions are to be answered in the framework of Granger causality. So what is Granger causality saying? So Granger causality is saying is that what we try to do is essentially do a regression analysis. You try to express that in one case you assume that there is no relation between the two x and y. Okay, now what you try to do is you try to express x, the time series x, as a function of its own old values. So this is basically nothing but the autoregressive model which we had talked about 3 or 4 lectures earlier. Right, you remember the ARIMA model and so on, which we had earlier discussed. So this is basically the same thing. It's like saying that you try to predict the future values of this time series x based on the past values of this same variable. Okay. And so of course the learning problem here is to estimate these parameters a1, a2, a3, etc. And we all have already discussed how to do it. So we frame it as some kind of a regression problem. That is to say, we let us say the model is like this. The proposed model is like this. Xt is equal to a1 of xt minus 1 plus a2 of xt minus 2 plus a3 of x t minus 3. Now what we do? We define a loss function like this. So for every time point, like let's say x hat t is the observed value, like is the predicted value, and xt is the observed actual value. Okay, and then we like define a loss function which measures their difference, their square difference. In fact, I sum it over like different values of t, like say for example for a p, let's say up to n, up to this period I have this is my training period or my model fitting period, and from next onward this is the testing period. So basically from t equal to n plus 1 to say for example n plus m, let us say, or n plus capital T. For this is the testing period. So in this period I basically make a difference like this like calculate this thing observed, and I measure the error. Now how to find these variables a1, a2, a3, etc. That is done during the training phase. So in the training phase also we we calculate the loss function again, this time specifically on the on these time points where we like which are within the training phase. So again we use the same loss function. Basically we try to like make this prediction xt minus a x1 t minus 1 minus a2 x t minus 2 minus a3 x t minus 3, the whole thing square, right? This is the squared error during the so we can call this as the training loss, right? So now what do we have to do? We now want to select a1, a2, a3 in such a way as to minimize the training loss. So in other words, a1, a2, a3 is basically is equal to arg min of L, right? So we and so now how do we select, how do we achieve that? How do I select the values of a1, a2, a3 that minimize this training loss? The obvious answer is by the process of taking derivatives and equating them to 0. So if we do these kinds of things, we get some equations, we solve them, and we get the values of the like the model parameters which we are looking for. So this way we get like this way we get a model and we test it and we get a loss. Let us call this as loss 1. Now we come to the alternative model. What's the alternative model? The alternative model is that the future values of x depends not only on the past values of x but also on the past values of the other variable y. Okay. So now so note that this was my past model. Now the current model is like this. That is I am trying to predict xt not only in terms of the old values of x but also in terms of the old values of y. So this is still a regression problem only. It's still linear regression, but instead the predictors are no longer only x, but this is also y. Okay, so in this case also we can do the same kind of analysis. We instead of going for this model, we can go for the other model, in which case of course we will get more parameters which are a1 like a1, a2, a3, b1, b2, b3. So let us say our next model is like this. Xt is equal to a1 x t minus 1 plus a2 x t minus 2 plus a3 x t minus 3 plus b1 y t minus 1 plus b2 y t minus 2, sorry, y t minus 2 plus b3 of y t minus 3. Okay, so well, like in the training phase, again we like the extra terms we bring in here, and hence we have more variables in this thing, sorry, I mean more parameters in this thing. We have to carry out more more differentiations, and we finally get a1, a2, a3, b1, b2, b3, right? These are all the parameters we get. Now what do? We come to the testing phase again, and we now using this new model we do the prediction. So let us call this kind of prediction as x of double hat t. Okay, instead of single hat, which means using only past values of x, by double hat I mean using the past values of y as well. Okay, so now I measure this error. So now I have got the errors from both models, L1 and L2. L1 from the base model, where x is predicted only from x, and L2 is measured from the second model, where where x is predicted from the x as well as y. Okay. Now suppose that the second model fits the data better than the first model. Suppose that's the case. In that case, what can I say about L1 and L2? If this model is a better fit of the data than this model, then so if this, like from this model I got the loss function L1, in this I got the loss function L2. Now suppose I tell you that this is a better model than this one, then what can I say about L1 and L2?
L2 is less than L1.
Exactly, L2 is less than L1. Why? Yes, exactly. Why? Because we know that better the model, yes, thank you. The smaller, the better the model fits, the smaller is the loss function. So by checking this, by comparing L1 and L2, we can understand whether this model fits or this model fits. Now consider the situation where this model fits better, that is L2 is less than L1. That means what? That means if we include the past values of y, we can predict x better. In such a situation, we say that y causes x. That is, y is the cause. Sorry, we say y Granger causes x. That means to say y is the Granger cause and x is the Granger effect. Right? So the point to be noted here is that we have considered only past values. That is, we are trying to predict xt, but see, we have not considered yt. We have considered yt minus 1, yt minus 2, etc. only. So can anyone guess what's the reason? Roktima, are you here? Yeah, are you here, Roktima? Okay, anyone else wants to answer? Anyone?
Hello?
Yes?
Can
Yes?
you repeat?
I am saying, why are we not considering yt? Why are we considering only yt minus 1, yt minus 2, etc. to predict xt? I will give you the answer. The answer is that suppose suppose we consider yt, and suppose it turns out that xt does depends on yt. Now, because both x and t are happening at the same time, we cannot say whether it's x is like causing y or y is causing x, right? But if we are considering only the past values of y, then we can be sure that it cannot happen that xt is the cause of yt minus 1. Why? Because the cause can happen before the effect, but the effect cannot happen before the cause. That is where the time series nature of this data becomes important. because yt minus 1 happened earlier than xt, so it makes sense to say that yt minus 1 is the cause and xt is the effect. Okay, the same thing I could not have said if yt and xt had happened at the same time. In that case, either one could have been the cause and the effect. So if this kind of a thing happens, then we say that y Granger causes x. On the contrary, if it turns out that L1 is lower than L2, that is this model fits better than this model, then sorry, that cannot happen. Yeah, I mean, because this model is a special case of this model, that if it turns out that L1 equal to L2, then that means that basically means that uh, it means that utilizing these terms does not have any benefit. It does not help our regression in any way. So that means we can say that y is not a Granger cause of x. Okay. So now if we are asked to like if we are given two time series x and y, like say the GDP time series and the emission time series, and we are asked which is the cause and which is the effect. So what I will do, or is there a mutual relationship between them? So what we will do basically is that we will try to express like see if x can be expressed in terms of past values of y. If yes, then y Granger causes x. Then I will try to see if y can be expressed as in terms of the past values of x. Okay, if so, then y Granger causes Granger causes x. So then we have to like now if both of these are found to be true, then we can say that there is a bidirectional relationship between them. So if I write this afresh, just a second. So if it like, so what I do is I try to express like xt in terms of x t minus 1 etc. I mean I try to express x as a function of the past values of x as well as sorry, and I get a loss, let's say L1. Now I try to express yt, sorry, just a second. Now I try to express xt as a function of past values of x1 as well as, sorry, past values of x as well as past values of y. And in this case, I get a loss of L2. Next, I do yt. I try to express as like past values of y, and I get a loss of L3. Next, I try to express yt as a function of the past values of y as well as the past values of x, and in this case I get a loss of L4. Okay, so now what happens, so now I have got L1, L2, L3, L4. So now suppose I reach this situation, L1 is less than L2 and L3 is less than L4. Then what happens? Then what conclusion do I draw? If this happens, that means L1 is less than L2. That means what? That sorry, less than equal to and less than equal to. So if L1 less than equal to L2 means what? That means this is a better model. That means what? That means y does not Granger cause x. Okay, let us just write. So this symbol, this arrow with a G written, this means Granger causality. Granger causes. Okay, so this is what we get. On the on the other hand, if I get L3 less than equal to L4, that means what? That means x, that is incorporation of x, does not help y. So we can say that x also does not Granger cause y. So that means what? There does not seem to be any causality relation between x and y. But if it happens that L1 less than equal to L2, but L4 less than equal to L3, then what happens? That means y does not Granger cause x, but it seems that x does Granger cause y. So in this case, there seems to be a like one directional causality from x to y. and if it so happens that L2 is less than equal to L1, meaning that yes, Y Granger does G cos X, and I also find that L4 is less than equal to L3, meaning that yes, X does G cos Y. That means what? There is a bidirectional relationship. Okay. So this is the story of Granger causality. And so like if you are given a two time series like this, as has already been discussed, what you can do is you can try to express one in terms of the other, and accordingly how well you are able to express them, accordingly you will have to draw this conclusion of which is the cause and which is the effect, or are both of them causes of each other. Okay, so this is basically the story how you calculate the causal relationships in case of time series data. Now let us come to a new problem. This is called the Markov model. So again, this is related to time series or sequential data. So let us consider a particular person. Okay, okay. Before considering a particular person, let us consider once again the time series of a parameter like this. Let us say unemployment. Okay. So let us say that there is a particular country in which we are like trying to study unemployment. That is how many people are unemployed, and yeah, so how many people are basically unemployed among the people who are employable. What percent of them are unemployed? Let's say we are measuring this. So as we know, like there are actually agencies which there is, in fact, there is this agency called CMIE, Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy, right? So they actually collect this unemployment data through market surveys. So what? So that means what? That means at each quarter of the year, say Q1 of 20, Q2 of 20, Q3 of 20, etc., etc. What they do is they collect what percentage of the employable people in India are are unemployed, and of course that way we'll get a time series like this. Maybe we'll get this. There may be some periods where lots of people are losing their jobs and hence unemployment is increasing, and then again there can be periods where it's decreasing and so on. Okay, so suppose, so this is the observed data. So now behind this observed data, so these are actually nothing but the gross numbers. That means what? We are not talking about individuals. We are not talking about whether a particular person is employed or unemployed. We are just taking the entire country or the entire labor force of the country, and we are seeing whether that is what is the condition of it. How many of them are employed and how many of them are unemployed. We are trying to make an estimate of that. Now, so as we can understand, and like as we all know from our knowledge, from whatever we see in the news, we know that there has been a prolonged period where India, the employment in India has been falling. That got exacerbated at the time of the first lockdown, when a record number of people lost their jobs. But then again, as the economy opened up, there was a period where some of that unemployment was made up for and more people again found jobs. Then again, if another lockdown happens, or something really bad happens, again such a thing will happen, or lots of people will lose their jobs, etc. Now this is the gross story. Now let us come to the fine-grained or individual story. Let us focus on a particular person Y. So like an individual person, and this person who is part who is part of the labor force. Now the question is whether this particular person whether this person is employed at any given time, whether this person is employed or not employed, or we can consider different other states. Say for example, there are of course two possible states. One is unemployed, the other is employed, and then there is another possibility, which is this O, which means that they are out of the labor force. This means unemployed. This means employed, that means they have a job, and this means out of the labor force, that is they are no longer looking for job. Now why should this happen? For various reasons. It may, for example, it might happen that this person has died of COVID. So in that case, of course, there is so this person is out of the labor market. Or it may also happen that this person has migrated to a different country, so he or she is out of India's labor force. Or maybe they have got due to their family conditions, they are no longer available for work. So for such reasons, they are out of the labor force. Okay, so now what we can say is that each person has state variables like this. We call them as state variables. So now what now before going into the details, let me point out to this paper. So this is a working paper on the International Monetary Fund on the dynamics of the labor market. So let us see what they have to say. This paper proposes a hidden state Markov model, or HMM, that incorporates workers' unobserved labor market attachment into analysis of labor market dynamics. So unobserved labor market dynamic attachment. What is labor market attachment? Means how that particular person is attached to the labor market. Are they employed, or are they unemployed, or are they out of the labor market? Into the analysis of the labor market dynamics. What is labor market dynamic? But dynamics, this the gross numbers, that is how the number of or how the unemployment number is changing over time, right? So what are they saying? Unlike the previous literature, which typically assumes that a worker's observed labor force status follows a first order Markov process, the proposed HMM allows the workers with the same labor force status to have different history dependent transition probabilities. Okay, so what that means may sound a bit complicated at this stage. So let's go slow. So let us say that these things, or these what I called as the state variables, these are basically the status of this particular individual. So as I know, as we all know, this status can can vary. That is, a person may be like, if we consider a person's an individual person's status at the different time points, we may see that they are employed now, they are employed again, they are employed again, now suddenly they become unemployed, they stay unemployed for a while, then they become employed, uh, and then suddenly they go, that is, they go out of the labor market. Let's say these are the observations for a particular person. Okay. So now what, like the as you can see that there is a sequence of these E and T variables, in the sequence of the state variables at the different points. So so this is one possible sequence. Now another possible sequence is as follows: E T E T E T E T, etc., etc. Okay. Now, for a particular person, for any particular person, which do you think is more likely? Is this more, does this more realistic, or does this more realistic? Just common sense. No machine learning here.
First one.
First one. Why? I agree with your answer. It's probably the first one.
They're employed for some time, then for some time
Right.
unemployed, instead of losing job every other day.
Yeah, right.
And getting a job.
Right. So that is, so basically it means that whatever state a person is in, it's likely that they will stay in that state for a while. If I have a job today, most likely I will have that job for some time. Now, of course, transition change points happen. Now, suppose I lose a job. Now, if I lose a job, then it's unlikely that immediately tomorrow itself I will find another job. So I will be unemployed for a while till I become employed. it's unlikely, like there may be some people who frequently keep changing jobs, or who may be forced to look for that is who are doing informal jobs. For them, they will be employed for a while, then maybe in a different season they will be unemployed, etc. Even then it's unlikely that we will see such a regular pattern. Okay, so that basically suggests that like let us denote by y the person's status at any time t. Okay, yt. Okay, so yt, as I said already, can take two values. Like there are, it can take three values. U it means unemployed, E means employed, and O means out of the labor market. So now I may want to study these transition probabilities. What is the probability that yt is equal to E given yt minus 1 is equal to E? Okay. Or what is the probability that yt is equal to u given yt minus 1 is equal to u? Or what is the probability of changing the status? What is the that is, if I am like unemployed today, what is the probability that tomorrow I will find a job? Or for that matter, if I am having a job today, what is the probability that tomorrow I will find that I don't have a job? And then finally, so if I am having a job, what is the probability that tomorrow I will go out of the labor market? Okay, so these are some things which I may be interested to study. So what the study which I was just showing you, what these people have done, or what in fact what an earlier study has done, is that they have carried out a survey among people, among different people, and then based on that they have tried to estimate these probabilities. That is, they have interviewed a large number of people, say some 1000 people they have interviewed. They have actually recorded from those people in which months or which quarters they were employed and when they were unemployed, or when they just decided to go out of the labor market, that is make themselves like unavailable for work. And then based on the responses of those persons, they basically have calculated these things based on relative frequencies. So just like we used these relative frequencies in case of decision trees the other day, so here also like we go for relative frequencies. It's like basically say suppose we have this turns out to be 0.8. That means like if we look at the data, it seems like if any person is employed today, there is 80% chance that they will continue to be employed tomorrow, and only a 20% chance of their losing a job. Similarly, like if someone is unemployed today, if this is 0.6, that means that even if today someone is unemployed, then tomorrow they are going to be employed and things like that. Okay. So so they, like what they do, what the study has done is that, or what the study suggests is that we make use of such probability distributions. We can estimate such probability distributions and then use this to make to try to fit the gross numbers of the unemployed people. So in other words, it's like saying, say for example, if at a given point t, let us say that n1 people are employed and n2 people are unemployed. Okay. So so what is the probability that that is from n1 people, what is the expected number of people who will be employed at the next point, which is t plus 1? So if this probability, let us call this as P of EE. Okay, probability of employed to employed. Similarly, this we call as probability of unemployed to unemployed. This we call as the probability of unemployed to employed, and so on. So if N1 people are currently employed, then and N2 people are currently unemployed, then I want to understand what is going to be the situation at time t plus 1. So the answer may be as follows. Now these N1 people are there. So some of them in T+1, most of them or many of them will continue to hold their jobs. Some of them will lose their jobs, and some of them will go to their will just drop out of the labor market. So like based on these probabilities, we can say that what will happen to these N1 people. Can you say what will happen to these N1 people? Yes. How many out of these N1 people, how many of them do you think these N1 people are currently employed? How many people do you think will be employed in the next T+1 also? Can I estimate that number using these probabilities? No, give you said 0.8 of N1, right? So instead of 0.8, let us go. Let us just use this notation P of EE. So that means what? That means N1 times P of EE number of people are going to stay employed. How many people will become out of these N1? How many of them will become unemployed? Quick.
N1 times PEU.
N1 times P of EU. That means that is these many people will become on an average will become unemployed. And finally N1 P of EO, these people will go out of the labor market. Similarly, if you consider the N2 people who are currently unemployed, then what happens? I find that N2 P UE, these many of them, like what happens to these people? They remain,
They will get employed.
they get employed, they find employment. Then N2 PUU people, what happened to them? They remain unemployed.
They will remain unemployed.
And finally, N2 P of UO people are out of the labor market. So we can say that today, if there are these are the, of course, apart from that, there will be people who are coming into the labor market also. That's a like let us say call that as NI. So that is also there, but let us say that we neglect that factor for the time being. So so like we can say that out of all these people, so what happens in time T+1 is that N1, sorry, let me write it maybe here. What am I saying? I am saying that so N1, N2 are the number of employed and unemployed people in time T1. Now that number has changed like this, plus N2 UE, P of UE. This is the new number of employed people, and the new number of unemployed people is as followed. Right? So basically with the help of this individual level model, I am able to get an estimate of the market dynamics, that is of the gross numbers. So this is like the labor market dynamics. So I can say that if this model actually makes sense, and if if I have estimated these probabilities correctly, then I can actually and then given the gross numbers at any given point of time, I can actually predict what the numbers are going to be at the next stage, and at the next stage, and at the next stage, right? I can actually build a predictive model for the labor market dynamics. So, so although the model I have built is at an individual level, but I can use it to make predictions at the gross level. Okay. So, but there is a problem. The problem is that this model is not a great model. That is, we have made various assumptions which are not very good or which are not very realistic. Now, can some of you tell or when make a guess about what those wrong or simplistic assumptions were? Yes, anyone? When we consider the different person states to be unemployed, employed, and out of markets, and when we actually try to build some kind of a probabilistic model like this, that every person seems to be jumping from the employed state to the unemployed state or employed state to the employed state with a particular probability. This is what the assumption we made. What can be a mistake in that assumption? Priyanka, want to venture a guess? Priyanka, are you here? Anyone else? Pankhuri?
Sir, in the model that all the time periods may not be similar.
Okay, fine. Good point. Well taken. Any other point? Okay, for your benefit, let me answer the question. So the point which Pankhuri said, it's definitely a good idea. That is, for example, like in the period, like in those times, say in the 2000s decade, where India's economy was basically on what they call as a bull run. Then the dynamics would have been in one way, and like during the times of COVID, where we often go into lockdowns and various kinds of restrictions, it's like we can say that the behavior of the labor market or these probabilities are going to be quite significantly different. That is, right now the probability that any employed person will lose a job suddenly is much higher than what it is at normal times, and much less like in really prosperous times, right? So so that's a definitely a good point. We cannot consider that these probabilities are constant over time. Another point I will say is that so here we have assumed that, so basically here we have made a homogeneous assumption. Assumption of homogeneity. Homogeneity of what? Homogeneity of the people. We have assumed that for all the people, these probabilities will be the same. But we know that we can actually understand that these probabilities are not the same for different people. So again, let me ask you, can you give some examples of why these probabilities will not be the same for different people?
So suppose a person doesn't want to be employed, then we are considering
No,
these
if
probabilities
someone
for him as well.
if someone does not want to be employed, then we are basically saying that they are out of the labor market. Like keeping that kind of thing aside. Suppose they all want to be employed, but still their probability that can be defined. Why?
So different people will have different skill sets.
Definitely, exactly. So suppose like define, we know that at defined points of times, job prospects vary from one sector to another. Like if someone has a PhD, they are more, like it's more likely that they will be considered more employable than someone who has who is just 12th pass, right? So their educational qualification definitely is so like definitely is a factor behind whether which dictates these probabilities. On the other hand, what kind of job, that is whether someone is employed today and what is the probability that they will retain their jobs tomorrow, depends on what kind of job. There are some jobs, if someone is in a government service, most likely they will have job security, so this probability will persist. But it may well happen that if somebody is working like someone who is like working as a say as a contract laborer under some construction company, it's these are like considered as the highly expendable jobs. Like any day you can lose the it's like hire and fire policy almost. So these probabilities can depend on a variety of other factors. So that is why this homogeneous model is not a good model. So what people do is they go for a particular type of model known as the hidden Markov model, which we saw in that paper. So the nitty-gritties of the hidden Markov model we cannot go into in this course, but the basic idea is the following. There are some attributes which are hidden or which are unobserved. And then there are things which can be measured or observed. Say, for example, the employment state of the different persons. Okay. So basically what we are saying is that it's really these hidden states which change over time. So that is to say, like there is Z1, then there at time t equal to 1, there is Z1. At time t equal to 2, there is Z2. Then there is Z3 and so on. And then there are the observations Y1, Y2, etc. And now the claim is that the observations depend on the on that hidden or unobserved attributes, but the dynamics is at the state of the unobserved variables. That is to say, these unobserved variables, let's say Z, they take some state values which which may be or which we may denote as say Z1, Z2, Z subscript 1, Z subscript 2 up to Z subscript M. And the observed ones Y, they take some state variables say Y1, Y2 up to YS, Y subscript S. Okay, so like in the previous example, these can be unemployed, employed, and out of labor market. And these Z1, Z2, these can be various other factors which which are not really in our control. Okay, which may include the person's nature of the job, their educational qualification, the economic prosperity of the times, the various other factors, etc. But these are not things. These need not be things that are interpretable to us. But we still say that these unobserved variable, it takes m possible values. These unobserved values basically encode all the external information, encode external factors, and these external factors keep changing over time. So basically we now come up with two different types of the dynamics. So instead of now trying to make up the predictions at the level of Y as we are doing earlier, we now make the predictions at the level of Z. That is these unobserved conditions which change. These are these are the things which we try to estimate. Okay. That is to say, if the unobserved values took a particular value B in time t, then what value does it take in time A? And this is the transmission probabilities, or in other words, these are the dynamics of the models. Transmission prob, and these are the dynamic, these define the dynamics of the model. And then there is the observational probabilities, that is given or at a particular time the a person's latent or unobserved stage is B. What is the probability that the person's observable state is, let us say, as a C? Okay, so these are kinds of things which we try to predict. These are what are known as the emission probabilities. So this story which I told just now is qualitatively different from the previous story in the sense that earlier I was saying that given my situation or given my employment status at a particular time, that is going to influence my employment status at the next time. Now here I am saying that's not the case. There are various external factors which keep on changing over time, and at any given time my employment status is is influenced by those external factors only. It's really those external factors which keep changing and not my employment status. So here you can again see some kind of a causal relationships. It's not correct to say that y like y that is yt minus 1 is impacting yt. This is like this was the assumption in the previous model, right? But in this model I am saying this is not the case. It's really xt which is the cause and yt is the effect. Now what is the cause of xt? That is xt minus 1. So this is how the story is. The stories are differing. Okay, sorry, not x, z, right? Then we are saying that zt is the cause and yt is the effect. Now what is the cause of zt? The answer is zt minus 1. So the dynamics is at the level of the unobserved things, and the observation are impacted by those unobserved things. Now, of course, there are various like modeling questions involved here. As I said already, that these are unobserved things. These are not things which we can observe or measure. If so, then how do we know what values these should take, right? Or how many values these should take? Typically, we consider that these unobserved, these unobserved conditions can be grouped together to form a certain number of typical conditions. M may be a number of typical conditions and these y's depend on that. So now in the previous case we estimated the dynamics parameters, that is these kinds of parameters, the probability yt minus t plus 1 equal to e given that yt is equal to u. These kinds of parameters we have observed, that is we have estimated directly through relative frequencies from a survey. But in this case we are not able to we will not be able to estimate that directly. Why? Because we are not, if these are unobserved things or unobserved factors, then how will I observe them from a survey? It's not possible. And nor will I be able to estimate these probabilities. So here is where there is a machine learning problem. This is a learning problem. That is to say, we are estimating the parameters of the hidden Markov model. So given some observations of y, so how do we estimate the parameters of the given HMM? Now, how we actually observed or estimate those parameters, that is like a question of it requires quite a bit of machine learning to answer that. We will not do that in this class. What we will do in sometime in the next week is we will see how using various Python libraries of hidden Markov model, what is the how we can utilize this parameter, this model for time series related problems. Okay, for especially for example for the labor market problem which we talked about. Okay, so with that we come to the end of this class, and I am again sorry for extending it 20 minutes. So as I had said, like yesterday we were talking about taking an extra class on Sunday. That is not going to happen. We will meet on Monday as usual, and the test for this module, the lectures of this module will end next week, and on 4th October, which is the Monday of the following week, we will have a test on this module. Okay, it will be a 1 hour class test during the class hours. Okay, thank you.